If I told you there was a society that was so advanced, so impressive, and so powerful that it angered the gods by its very existence, that those gods then buried that society into the sea? Well, I'm going to tell you anyway, because my name is Gabe Bauer, and this is Top Shelf History, where we combine great stories with great drinks. This is Plato's Paradise. It is the cocktail I've made for you today based on the city of Atlantis, a former empire that was described by Plato to have incredible amounts of technology and power. It's a drink that is made with 4 simple ingredients: blackberry brandy, gin, blue curacao, and bergamot liquor, and also a little bit of a fiery 151 as well. It describes, I think, and shows the city of Atlantis in both of its beauty and also in its destruction, but we'll get into that later. The city of Atlantis is first described in Plato's discussions Timaeus and Critias. These Socratic discussions describes an empire that lies beyond the pillars of Heracles, what most modern day people believe the Strait of Gibraltar. But not all modern people, because as with all things with the city of Atlantis, there's some room for speculation. Now, purportedly in the story, the city of Atlantis was first created by the god Poseidon. It was sectioned off into 10 different little kingdoms that were all of equal size and were bonded by a truce that kept them all together. They would actually sacrifice a bull to Poseidon every year to kind of rebond their truce. And the chief kingdom among them, at times of war, was able to drum up 1,200 ships and 1,000,000 men. And they were so powerful and technologically advanced that they were actually able to conquer the whole of the Mediterranean. They were only stopped, according to Plato, by the Athenians. But as Atlantis continued to prosper and grow in its technology and its wealth, it actually lost its morality. Morality, ironically, not something that the Greek gods were known for, but regardless, Zeus convened the heavenly council in order to dole out their punishment to the Atlanteans. And it's around this point that the discussion with Critias by Plato ends. But as we know, the legend continues on. And we know that the gods did end up giving out Atlantis's comeuppance through earthquakes and flooding, so much so that it eventually sunk below the sea. Now that's a pretty crazy story, and Plato was a pretty impactful guy. But what's even more crazy is that for the majority of history, this wasn't really a big thing. Not until the 19th century, when former US Senator Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian Society. And this was a bestseller in 1882. This reinvigorated the modern Westerners of the story of Atlantis and inspired historians, treasure hunters, and archaeologists alike to see if Plato's paradise actually existed. And when we think about it, we have to wonder, was Plato actually serious? Did he actually mean to describe a historical place in Atlantis? Well, a lot of people, most people, think that Atlantis was just a metaphor or an allegory, something to continue his Socratic discussion on Athenian society. And this is kind of backed up in the fact that Atlantis and Athens mirror each other in the fact that they're both very powerful city-states, but one is utopian and corrupted while the other ends up stopping it in its tracks, right? So it can be seen as to where the Athenians and the Atlanteans were just polar opposites of each other, and Plato used that as a metaphorical device. But it's a lot more fun to think that it actually exists. So let's look at a few theories that say it does. Now, the first of the Atlantis is totally real theories comes from Donnelly himself in his book. He uses the location that Plato describes in the story, being beyond the Pillars of Heracles, and to describe that the city of Atlantis was actually a continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, at the time, Donnelly thought that the Atlantic Ocean was only perhaps a couple hundred feet deep and thought that it sunk due to the shifting waters of the ocean. But modern oceanography and sonar mapping actually negates that, but it's understandable considering the description that Plato gives. The second theory of Atlantis and where it is that it wasn't actually buried underneath the sea at all, but actually buried underneath the sands. Based on the findings of the Rashat structure, which is 300 miles inland in Mauritania, there's a geological dome that actually fits a lot of the descriptions and the measurements that Plato gives out in the size of Atlantis. And there are fossils and bones and different aquatic artifacts that are found around the site, so it's reasonable to say that it was once underwater. So Atlantis could be there, right? But the final theory that I want to focus on, and trust me, there are many more, but this is the one I think is most telling in the Atlantis is real theories, is that Atlantis was actually Thera. Now, this is perhaps the most popular among the Atlantis was real theories, and the story goes like this, that Thera was once part of the Minoan Empire, and the Minoan Empire was essentially the more powerful empire prior to Athens, Spartans, and Thebes, those city-states growing to their prosperity. And the Minoans had a fairly prosperous reign. Now, Thera, which is modern-day Santorini, used to have a volcano on it, and the explosion on Thera, the volcanic eruption, was one of the most violent in all of history. It was massive. I mean, massive. Other volcanic eruptions, like for example Krakatoa in 1883, killed 40,000 people, had 40-foot tsunamis, and could be heard 3,000 miles away, and dropped the global temperature by 1 degree. This was about 4 to 5 times larger in impact and in violence. So you can only imagine the effect this had back on the ancient world. And what we basically know is that 2/3 of what Thera was is now below the sea. And the Minoan Empire ended up fading into the obscurity of history. So with an empire falling, an island that then sunk beneath the sea, and the proximity to Greece, seems pretty likely, right? But man, this is why I love history. You know, although we can't actually confirm whether or not Atlantis existed, we can confirm that this drink will. So let's get into it. Now, with Plato's Paradise, I wanted to create a drink that mimicked the story of Atlantis itself, something that fell beneath the sea. And particularly, I wanted to mirror the story that I think, at least historically, Atlantis could have existed on Thera. So we're going to go towards that route. And for that, we're going to start off our drink by creating the ocean that lies beneath it. And for that, we will have Bombay Gin as our base. Now, I actually steeped this in butterfly pea flowers that are dried. Really cool stuff. You can find them, I think, at most of your grocery stores. Not the cheapest thing, but what's a really cool aspect of this is that it changes color. So as you steep it, it gets this beautiful violet color. And then when you add citrus juice, like lemon juice or lime, it will change color. And I'm about to show you how that's going to look in a moment. But first, we're going to put in 1 ounce of our butterfly, wow, speak well, Gabe, pea colored gin. Next, we're going to follow that up with our color changing element. It's going to be about 3 milliliters, which is about 1/8 of an ounce of sweet and sour mix. Now with the citrus in here, you're going to see that the color is going to change dramatically, and I love it. Now I'm using an eyedropper here that has a 1 milliliter measure, just so that we can be precise, and we don't want to overdo the flavors here. This is mostly for the looks, but I mean, if you look at that already, you can see it's starting to change to a bright purple, almost pink. Oh, it's gorgeous. I love it. We put that back down. You can already see that has changed dramatically. It's no longer the dark violet, it's that beautiful purple. And one of the reasons why I wanted to use this is because I think back to the story of the Odyssey, and the Greeks didn't really have a word for blue back in the day, so they typically described the seas as wine-colored or this deep shade of red or purple because they just didn't have anything to describe blue in. Really, really interesting thing about it. So I think this goes along with the way that they told their stories. Next, we're going to introduce back a little bit blue because, let's be real, the ocean doesn't look like that. And we're going to throw in 1/2 ounce of blue curacao. Now, blue curacao has a great citrus flavor that goes well with gin, and that color is gonna bring it back to a nice deep blue. And the purple gives it a brightness that I really like about it. So that's another reason that we wanted to change the color there, because we're getting more dimension in our color. Next, we're gonna follow that up with a 1/2 ounce of Italicus Rosario de Bergametto liquor. This is delicious. It's an aperitif, so it's a little bitter, but also pretty sweet. It's a little syrupy, I'd say, but it's fantastic. You got the great bergamot flavor. This comes from Italy, so still in the Mediterranean area, although it's not Greek, but this will add tremendous body to our flavor profile in this drink. Then, finally, to finish off the color of our beautiful sea, we're going to add in 3 milliliters, or 1/8 of an ounce once again, of blackberry brandy, if I could speak correctly. Again, using an eyedropper because we want to make sure that we get the color right and the flavors right here. So precise measurements are going to be a little bit more important, but I think it's just going to look wonderful. And so we have our colors in there. You can see that there's a definition in there. You can see the brightness on the top and the dark color on the bottom. But as we continue to swirl this around, this will turn into a deep, dark blue. That is just gorgeous, and it reminds me so much of the ocean. Now, the last thing that we're gonna do here is that we have our ocean, but we need our island. We need our volcano. And for that, we're gonna add 151 to add a little bit of our volcanic element. We're gonna light this on fire, and then we're gonna add our island. So it's gonna be pretty awesome here. So let's add our flame here, 151. Now we don't wanna add too much because obviously we don't wanna ruin our drink. Now that may seem more than it should be. Now it's way more than it should be, but that's okay because we want this to burn off for a little bit. So let's begin lighting the fires of our volcano. There it is. Now we've got a good flame going. We're gonna add our island. Now as the island sucks out all of the air, you can see the immediate steam. You get that great effect. It's beautiful as it starts to bring it on down because all of the air is getting sucked in. It's creating its own little vacuum from the ice, plus you have the cooling effect, so you get the steam. And is that not one of the coolest things you've seen? I think it's one of the coolest things I've seen. I found out how to do this by watching a couple videos on the internet because the internet is amazing, but a great little garnish here because we have our little Thera with underneath it is the volcano. And as it's starting to deteriorate, you can see that we're ready to explode and this island is ready to collapse underneath. Now this is a great little garnish that you can do for your friends and family, kind of impress them. You put on a little show. You can see that the water is immediately beginning to melt from our little ice island, and as it continues to deteriorate in its structure, you'll be able to eventually let it collapse in. And there we have our Atlantis that has now fallen into the depths of the sea. Now, is that not awesome? Does that look so cool? It's in the beautiful blue water. You've got the ocean has now enveloped the former empire, the island nation of Atlantis. It looks fantastic. Let's see if it tastes as good as it looks. It's an incredible diverse array of flavors that's coming in here, but they work together so well. One thing that I love about gin, with its junipery-ness, I guess you could say, in terms of its flavor composition, is that it works really, really well with other botanicals or other herbal liquors. So the bergamot really complements the gin well. And then the sweet and sour mix really complements with the triple sec, or I should say the blue curacao well. And then you also have the blackberry brandy, which kind of ties it all together. It takes the bitterness, but it also takes the sweetness, and it just gives it a little nice refined taste. It's pretty complex, I guess you could say, in terms of the progression of flavors. And then the 151 adds another extra hit. Obviously you want to be a little bit careful. You don't want to give yourself too much because this drink is going to be a lot more potent depending on how much 151 you put in here. So you may want to let it burn off more before you put on your nice little ice dome. But Really good drink. Like I said, it has a lot of complicated flavors and just a nice natural progression. You get the sweet up front. Towards the end, you get those bitter botanicals all over, nice and boozy, beautiful, delicious, cold. I love it. And that is Last Call. So as you guys all know, I love history and I love drinking. And I also have found that I really love movies. And one of my favorite movies growing up was actually Atlantis, The Lost Empire, that was made by Disney. It was an animated movie for those of you who haven't watched it. That's all around this character, Milo Thatch. And he is on this tremendous journey that's around World War I is when the world is in setting. And they're heading, on this incredible journey trying to find the lost city of Atlantis. They find like this ancient book that was in Iceland on a shield. They just went to all of these different really, really cool places, and then they finally find the lost city of Atlantis. And I remember thinking of that movie when I was writing this episode and how much I really enjoyed and appreciated Milo Thatch, because Milo Thatch in a lot of ways was kind of the person that I wanted to grow up to be. He was, although a little dorky, he was someone that was really passionate about history. And although he wasn't always accepted by the others in his field, he knew what he was talking about. And in the end, he wasn't your contemporary hero, but he was the hero that justified, I think, the story in and of itself, to show that the little guy can be the most important person in certain situations. His breadth of knowledge over Atlantis, his mastery of linguistics, his passion for the culture and for the people to be able to save the city is something that's remarkable from a character standpoint. And I have always fantasized, I guess you could say would be the correct term, of being one of those characters like an Indiana Jones or a Milo Thatch or a Nathan Drake if you play video games, to be one of those archaeologists or one of those historians that was able to go on one of these remarkable journeys to find the fantastic unknown lands that were purported to be true, but not everyone's certain, and to finally find those places. And what's really cool that you see as you kind of go throughout most of these movies is that, except for maybe Indiana Jones, who becomes famous in his storyline, Milo Thatch kind of gives up the glory and the riches. And instead he says, you know what, it's more important for me to be a part of the people and to be a part of the culture that I have devoted my life to. And that equally was impactful for me. I actually dressed up as Milo Thatch, I think 2 years ago for Halloween, just because he was one of those characters that I just loved. And hopefully in one day I can become an expert in some field or some area of history the way he was. And who knows, maybe one of these days I can go on an archaeological dig. I'll take you guys along with me, and maybe we'll stumble into a lost city that everybody thought was once fake and then we proved to be real. But we'll see what happens. And to Milo Thatch and for all the other kids out there that hopefully will be inspired by that movie, remember that history is fantastic. It's amazing. These places can be real if you try hard enough to go find them. And I'll make sure to take you along. And for those of you who join me, if we don't find anything, I'll be sure to make a drink. Thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to check out any more of our historically inspired cocktails, you can find them here, or you can also find them at our website at topshelfhistory.com. Now, before I sign off here, I just want to say thank you so much to our first patron on Locals, John Mooney. John has been one of our biggest supporters from the beginning, and he is now one of our first supporters officially on Locals. If you guys would like to join our community on Locals, please feel free to go over there and check it out. We have so much exclusive content with our after hours and our behind the bars. There's a lot more value that we're producing for you guys there, so please consider giving it a check out. And from all of us here at Top Shelf History, remember, history is better with a drink. Cheers.